time for blunt thoughts. And I've titled it today, The State of the Nation, Our Economy, Galamsey, and the Way Forward. The State of the Nation, Our Economy, Galamsey, and the Way Forward. And my apologies, some of you have become used to getting this at around 9-something today. We've done a little switcheroo. But here's what I want to do. On the back of the SONA and everything that has happened, I am going to insist we ought to do better when it comes to data in this country. Let's know what the facts are so that no one can tell us what is not true, so that the data will reveal what our reality is. This morning, I've been calling for the NDPC and our political parties to be more integrated. Our political parties are intentional, NDC and MPP sometimes, because they have their agenda. But what is the national agenda? We ought to hold these political parties to that fire of accountability so that they can't come and do some of what they do and waste some of the money they waste, and guess who pays? We do. And let's face it, all of them, sometimes it is contracts here, contracts there, they are benefiting, they are lining their pockets, they are siphoning our resources that could have gone into that school in your community, that medical facility in your community, that road that is so bad, that could have gone into that. That could have gone into better services for all of us. We can't keep doing this, regardless of whose ox is God, regardless of which party is in power. I don't care. And I've made mention of it. The NDC may have a small honeymoon that we are giving them, a little honeymoon. Beyond that, it's going to be bloody blue, like in the US, they'll say murder in a figurative context, because we can't keep allowing some of what happens. I was saying just this morning, look at our state-owned enterprises. A lot of them bring in zilch, zero, nothing. And look at what we pay their executives. Makes no sense. We are not angry enough when it comes to those issues. And that anger doesn't necessarily have to do with this current administration. It has gone on for so long, but that anger ought to be brought to bear even as we look at our constitutional review and the new commission that has been set up to relook at some of these developments. Now, going back to some very salient issues. You see, yes, sir. You look at the size of our current government in terms of ministers and deputies. The president promised 60. He is sticking to his guns. We salute him for that. But we can do even better. We can do better. After all, I don't know whether this would have come to bear. The former vice president, Dr. Baumia, promised 50 ministers, right? We can do even better than 50. So, like Oliver Twist, we are going to ask for more. Mr. President, you've done quite a bit with this by sticking to your promise, though the minority leader was saying, own up to Ghanaians and apologize. And I think a man must stick to his word. And I think the president is doing that, which is good. But sometimes we have to delve deeper into the data. Some may say, but what does this mean for us? So look at it this way. Ministers and deputies in the previous government were 85, and that was after it had been whittled down from 100 plus. Mohammed's promise was 60. The average monthly salary, 30,202. It remains the same, right? 30,000. If you look at the total annual cost, you are looking at 30.8 million. For the previous government. Mohammed's promise, 21.7 million. That means already we've saved what? 9.1 million Ghana cedis just by listing the appointments and sticking to the number. Next slide. Now, in terms of cutting down the size of government, how much will then be saved between 2025 and 2028 when we go to the polls again? You are looking at almost 40 million Ghana cedis, 36.3 million Ghana cedis. You are looking at 9+ million per year. What that also means is this does not include other perks that the ministers will get, the freebies, the perks of the job, and other things that would have factored in. We've not factored all of that in here. Next slide. What then that means is if you're looking at close to 40 million Ghana cedis, okay, saved over 4 years, what could we have done with that? It can build many schools in some communities. It can build some patches of roads. It can lead to development. What this means is that if we cut down on wastage, not just in terms of appointments, but in many other spheres of our national life. Imagine how much more we could be saving from wastage. In fact, one of the biggest sources of spending in Africa and in Ghana is wastage. And we see it in the Auditor General's reports all the time. If we stemmed the tide of that, if we cut the blood flow of wastage to the cancer of wastage, only God knows how much we could save and how much better we could do for the ordinary Ghanaian. But then you also get to the bit about taxes being scrapped. And of course, we know the promise, the e-levy, COVID-19 levy, and betting tax. Let's look at the dynamics. Next slide. If you look at these taxes, the lost revenue over time, 13.91 billion from the COVID-19 levy, e-levy 8.27 billion. That is, if you're looking at 2025 to 2027. And then the betting tax, 5.1 billion. We've given you these details before. But if we lose this, where are we going? How will we bolster our economy and get taxes to pay for some of what we ought to? This government has spoken about cutting wastage, some of which we are seeing. Early days yet. Let's not celebrate yet. But at least positive signs we are seeing so far, and widening the tax net, which has become like a ritual for every government to talk about. But how can we actualize that? Time will tell. Next slide. Now, if you look at the lost revenue, 2025 to 2027, we are looking at 27.9 billion Ghana cedis. The money must be coughed up or coughed up from somewhere. Where will it come? Next slide. Then you look at our debt service obligations in 2025 alone, like you see behind me, $10.85 billion that we are looking at, which then makes me scratch my head in terms of our sinking fund and what is left in there, the $64,000 or $63,000 plus the $143 million. And then you look at ESLA and what was left in there, the about $45 billion and the $70 billion Ghana cedi debt that is left. You see, I keep saying efficiency, effectiveness. The way NDC and MPP, up to this point, at least we are hoping this will be new, have run this country. No proper business. In some instances, let me be fair, in some instances, because the MPP in some instances has done well, Kufuor especially, and coming down to some of them, Atta Mills and Mahama, have done a bit here and there. No one is all bad. But if you look at the inefficiencies, you'd realize that we have literally dug ourselves intentionally into a hole. How can you expend over 400 million, and I'm talking dollars, on a project? And for the members of the MPP, I say, we don't care about this. If you have the evidence, show us. For the members of the MPP who may counter this, if this has been disbursed and we have our Agenda 111 hospitals in the state in which they are, how are they commensurable? Cost versus value. Where's the value? And we have so many of such projects from the past leading to now. How can we develop as a country when we keep doing this? Now, 10.85 billion is our debt service obligation. Let's go to the next slide. But then we get to this important part, which also feeds into the conversation of how our economy is going. You see, I always like some honesty. Let's listen to the former vice president. The least a party that campaigned on jobs could do under conditions of unemployment is to innovate and create jobs rather than dismiss people. I like the vice president for innovative thinking, but sometimes. Next slide. Regrettably, these dismissals have been extended to directors who are public servants and not politicians. In some cases, the only reason for dismissal was that the individuals whose livelihoods have been destroyed are known to or related to politicians, as if to suggest that they cannot live independent professional lives regardless of their qualifications. Next slide. And let's look at this bit before I come back and share my thoughts with you. When I came to power, now we come to the current president. When I came to power, I left most of these public sector workers. But when this NPP government, and we're going back to 2017, right, took over, they dismissed them, and this is a bad precedent for our governance because potentially government can change in every 4 years. So if another government takes over, it means all those working in the public sector have to be dismissed for a new crop of employees to take over, and this is bad for governance. Next slide. Shall we check out the next one? Okay, so before I get here, I agree. Some of this must stop. But I'm also saying that you can't sneak in some of the numbers we see at the 11th hour and expect that to be okay. It is not okay. I feel we ought to get to the point where when a government is in its dying embers, you have the power, but maybe ethically, morally, whether you are NDC, MPP, CPP, whatever, some things should not be done. And when I get to the mining leases that were granted, that's another ethical issue, but I'll get there shortly. But wait, when the MPP did it in 2017, when Dr. Bawumia was a fresh vice president, was that against plutocracy? Was it not also against democracy? By his own words and reasoning, was that not too against the very thing he's talking about? The former vice president speaks of arbitrary dismissals. But how about his government's arbitrary and politically cooked recruitment? Let's talk about that too. You cannot pick and choose depending on how you're affected by certain actions, sir. Look, hold for me. I have people in the security services that I know who are apolitical. They don't even get involved in anything. Thankfully, this administration has said, for those who were recruited into the security services, we are not touching you. I think that was a good move. You can't say that all of them are politically aligned, but at the same time, when there is this thing done at a certain time, it creates suspicions. Principle is key in such discussions. If you will come seeking purported justice, then you must show that you yourself have been just. You cannot be seen to be unjust and yet criticize others for precisely what you did. There's a name for that. It's crass hypocrisy. My position on this is simple. Don't make many and worrisome last-minute appointments after you've lost an election, period. It's not to say you can't appoint at all, but the numbers you are pushing in, who is going to pay them? Look at the public sector wage bill. You can't employ such huge numbers, especially when it is clear a lot of them may, M-A-Y, very well be aligned to your political party. And when you are leaving behind an economy as sick as a dog, I simply cannot support you in that enterprise. I always use the benchmark of private business. Which private business, whose boss has been relieved of his duty, but has been asked to stay at post for, say, a month per his or her contract till a new manager is chosen, will be allowed to make such last-minute decisions and get away with it? And will those decisions be allowed to stand? I mean, let's be reasonable here. I don't care whether you are NDC or MPP doing this. It's sickeningly wrong, simple, and we must address it. The final bit I'll do, my time is done. The 318 mining licenses, we've spoken about it ad nauseum. 6 within the last 6 days of the former administration. If you go to the next slide, let's go to the next slide, please. Then you look at the dates. January 1st, initial check 67, update 276. January 2nd, initially 11, then 11. January 3rd, 19, then update 23, and then January 6th, 5, then 8. Look at that within 6 days, granted, 318. Maba, why? Why? That's the question. You see, this is what gives me a lot of cause for worry when it comes to the fight against Galamsey. If you sneak in these at the tail end, what were we trying to do? What were we hoping to achieve? 6 days, 318. Never even within the 8-year period of the MPP did this happen. But well, I just put the information out there. You do the reasoning, read between the lines, and decide for yourself. My name is Benjamin Akakpo. These are my blunt thoughts shared with you, raw, hot, unedited, undiluted. As always, I pray, may God bless Ghana and make her great and strong. And may He give us leaders after His own heart, like David in the Bible, who will serve us with love for God and country. Thank you for watching.